Welcome in. It's week 16. We are here. We are in the regular season semifinals for playoff leagues, but for DFS, every week's the same to some extent. But we have myself, Jeff Bell, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander here. We're going to break down this slate here on DraftKings and FanDuel, look at cash games, GPP plays. But Devin, welcome in. And what are you looking for this slate?
Merry Christmas to everybody. This will be the last time that we see you before that. This is me filibustering for this slate. Kind of a weird week. I mean, we're getting into that point where we have teams on quit watch that have officially not on quit watch anymore. We have teams that have quit. We have some teams that still care. And trying to figure out that is kind of why we're here tonight. And we have weird quarterback situations. So we're going to talk through that. Let's get into it.
Phil, what are you looking for games of the week this week?
Yeah, it looks like a really fun 11-game slate. A lot of star fantasy players and great matchups. Already some pretty good value on the board, which is rare for a Wednesday night when we record. But I'm betting that more opens up. In terms of games to target, number one to me looks like Lions at Bears, with the Lions as 6.5-point favorites, an extremely depleted defense that I think even this version of the Bears offense can take advantage of. And the Lions are just going to have to keep on scoring if they want to beat teams from here on out, because that defense is truly beaten up. Then the other game that I like the best is Rams minus 3.5 at Jets, which is a 46.5-point over-under. And the way that the Jets have been playing defense lately has been inviting some shootouts, even from the likes of Mac Jones. So I think that we could go back to that well. Then there's like a couple of maybe games in the middle. Cardinals at Panthers has some potential with a 47-point total. Eagles at Commanders with a 45.5-point total. And then the sides that we like, I think we're going to get into the Falcons in a moment, but they're big favorites against the Giants. The Bills favored by 2 touchdowns against the Pats. And then the Bengals. Man, Bengals-Browns, what could have been. But Jameis Winston, unfortunately, is riding the pine. And we're looking at Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but we at least like the Bengals side.
People are mad about that. I don't understand why.
That's because Kevin Stefanski is a thief of joy. That's why.
Jameis has been really bad.
Sure, but so are the Browns in general. And at least it's been fun. I'd rather have fun bad than can't throw the ball forward bad.
You kind of need to know if Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to be on the team next year. Can he actually be a backup guy?
I've got a pretty good idea that he shouldn't, and they already have a fine backup guy named Jameis Winston. But
well, there were stories this summer that the only reason Dorian Thompson-Robinson made the team was because it made Deshaun Watson feel a little bit better about himself.
It's not true, but yeah.
Neither here nor there, but before we go forward, please take a moment to like and subscribe and drop your comments, drop your thoughts, drop your Merry Christmas, whatever it might be. Happy holidays. We appreciate it, what anybody is celebrating this week. But we're going to go into our cash game plays. We're going to look at quarterback. And guys, it's just Michael Penix, right? Is there other options here at quarterback? We just slam in Michael Penix and moving on.
Do we have to?
You have to. Do we get to, Devin? It's the mindset, Devin. It's not, do we have to? It is, do we get to?
I really don't want to play Michael Penix. I understand it because he's 4,500. But I don't know. I don't love it. I mean, he's a guy that doesn't run. Hasn't ran since Indiana, right? I mean, he didn't run in Washington, so is he going to run in the NFL? Probably not. 4,500. The Giants, their defense is bad, but their pass rush is okay. But then the question, if you don't go Penix, it's Anthony Richardson or Caleb Williams, and I don't feel good about those guys either. So, man, fine. On DraftKings, fine. On FanDuel, there's no way. He's just not cheap enough. He's probably 6,000, but yeah, I'm not doing it there. So, fine. If you want to do it on DraftKings because the other options are Richardson or Caleb Williams, okay.
I'm a little bit more bullish on Penix. I'm enthusiastic about getting him into my lineup. So
why?
Well, he's
good
not,
and he's got talent around.
I think he might be good.
He's good. How? He's a guy who had 3 elite receivers in college, and Kirk Cousins has looked absolutely horrendous. Do we really think at this point in his career, Michael Penix is better than Kirk Cousins? No.
Yes.
No.
1,000% better than the current.
He can throw the ball more than 8 yards downfield. So, yeah.
Yeah. This current version of Kirk Cousins is not like Kirk Cousins from years past. He's clearly still recovering. Yeah, he's recovering from that Achilles. I mean, Penix isn't going to run, but he's mobile in the pocket. So he could avoid a pass rush. He's smart. He's got a really nice deep ball, nice touch on it when he throws downfield. I mean, in theory, he's like the polar opposite of Kirk Cousins, and he's exactly what that Atlanta offense needs. Now, the reason that I'm a little bit excited is because of what Vegas is telling me. Atlanta, when was the last time a rookie quarterback was making his first start and was nearly a double-digit favorite? And I know that says a lot about the Giants.
I am betting the shit out of the Giants. Sorry, Joe.
And maybe it says a lot about the Falcons' running game more than it says something about Penix. But, I mean, look, 4,500, he doesn't have to be perfect in this start. I put his median projection around 16 DraftKings points. I think there, in this matchup, is a lot of room to go up from there. So I'm fine with it. I'd rather play him than Richardson, who in cash I think is like you said probably the only other viable option. I mean, he played about as poorly as an NFL quarterback could play last week, and he posted 16.4 DraftKings points because of what he does with his legs. That's fine, but I do like what Penix enables us to do with the rest of the lineup, and I think he's a better play than you do. I'm trusting Matt Waldman's evaluation of his talent, and I'm trusting Vegas's evaluation of the game environment.
I'm trusting history of rookies making their first start, which just isn't good. It's actually quite poor.
Fair enough.
All right. Running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs.
But
and who else?
with that said, 4,500, I don't have another option to give you, so I'm playing him.
That's exactly right. It's almost the point where if you're not going to go there, then do you have to go to Josh Allen just to go swing all the way, or Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, something like that, just swing all the way and figure it out from that? Because, yeah, the middle just feels very empty this week.
Yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs.
Jahmyr Gibbs, and who else in running backs cash? Phil, what are you looking at here?
Yeah, it's Gibbs, who we get at his normal price, even though we could project for more than his normal workload. So we won't spend a ton of time there. Just know that in 3 games without David Montgomery last year, Gibbs averaged 18 rush attempts, 5 receptions, 132 scrimmage yards, and scored in 2 out of 3 games. Don't overthink it. He's the best asset in fantasy football moving forward. He's not cheap, but for as long as he costs less than Saquon Barkley, he is relatively cheap. The other running back that I'm putting next to him is James Conner at 7,100. I ended up big on Conner last week, and that paid off very well. I played him in 19 out of my 20 tournament lineups. The idea last week was matchup driven because he was playing New England, but there was also another factor. Amari DiMarcardo landed on IR, so it made sense that Conner would no longer come off the field on obvious passing downs and when they were in the hurry up. And that's more or less what happened. He split third down work with DJ Dallas, which is better than he was doing when DiMarcardo was in the lineup. And he took every snap in the 2-minute drill. So in addition to that, Trey Benson got hurt. So now we've got Connor in this mega workhorse role, and he's in the best matchup possible against Carolina's rush defense. I think that's a pretty clear play. And then I will be flexing a running back. I am pretty darn sure. The question is whether it's going to be an expensive one or a cheap one. Could we assume that Tony Pollard is finally going to sit out and miss a game after what we saw last week?
No.
You think he could once again get on the field and try to tough it out with no practice?
Brian Callahan wants you to know his team is very tough. So,
I mean, he was limping around out there.
Any team from the state of Tennessee this weekend, so I am not playing any Titans. Just letting you know.
All right. I think that Tony Pollard is going to miss this game. He actually, the one reason that he might not is because he does have some contract incentives that he's chasing down. So he might really want to be out there. But I think regardless of what's going on with him, it's going to be a lot of Tajay Spears. And I just think we know what we're getting with him if he gets a lot of touches. I mean, he had 27 DraftKings points last week when he was on the field more because Pollard missed some time in the game and they were in a negative game script, but he's a high efficiency runner, forces a lot of missed tackles, excellent receiver out of the backfield. Indy is a good matchup, and I'm thinking either Pollard is out or Spears is going to get the majority of that work. So I'll hand it over to you guys, and then maybe we'll come back at the end to what I would do if Pollard is obviously going to be active, because it really would change kind of everything that I'm doing at the wide receiver position.
Well, I'll give you a name. It's not going to be pretty. Well, first of all, I need to clarify something. My brain is absolutely broken because of running backs. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry just like ripped my heart out of my soul last week. To the point where I don't know where to go from here. Like it's bad. I was right about Chuba Hubbard and not playing him. I was right about Rico Dowdle and playing him over Chuba, but I had way too much Henry and I had way too much Saquon, both in great matchups and both just, I don't want to swear again. Cincinnati's defense is really bad. Like, horrendously bad. And why is Jerome Ford's projections across the industry so low?
Do you want me to answer that? Because I think I have the answer.
He's not a good running back, and I've been saying that since like day one. But like, people have him projected for like 7 points. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that ought to rise from there, and he's someone that I was going to mention when we talked about tournament plays, but that's where I slot him because I'm concerned about the offense with DTR. I don't know if Robinson is going to check down as much as Jameis would have been willing to, so I don't know if there's as much receiving upside as usual with Ford. And then we really haven't seen what it looks like with Deontay Foreman active in a while. So it
we
remains
saw it
to be
earlier
seen.
this season, and it's bad. But we'll save Ford for the GPP section because I don't think he's a cash game play. But I'm just, again, my brain is broken.
He's worth mentioning, no question, because of the matchup and the big playability. But I think that lends itself more to tournaments.
I would agree.
He wasn't really being used in the past game with Jameis. I mean, if Jameis had used him in the past game, maybe he would have less interceptions and still be playing.
Do you want the answer to that
Jameis
one?
was slinging it.
Do you want the answer to that one? If it's under 20 yards, Jameis isn't throwing the ball.
Yeah, no, he was slinging it. That's why he had so many interceptions.
Jameis doesn't know how to call a play call. It's go deep. That's it.
Or Burts.
Yeah. If I'm playing Michael Penix, I'm playing Saquon Barkley at 8,300. What are the chances against Washington that he's going to have another bad game? I don't think it's that high. 1,200 more than James Conner. 600 more than Chase Brown. I know Chase Brown has been good, but Barkley, is not going to be rostered by nearly enough people, especially in tournaments. I think we can talk about that later, but give me Saquon at 83. Tajay Spears, clearly the number one guy if Pollard were to miss. I don't think he's going to, but number one guy there. And then looking down, so like there's a number of different options in like the 5,500 to 6,500 range. I think the guy that I would target is Breece Hall. And he should be healthier than last week, going up against the Rams, where like the Rams defense has been horrendous. But I think Hall at least has he's underpriced, at least from my perspective. Has he been good? No, but he's at least a guy who should get 12 to 15 touches and has upside there. Again, I don't love it. I would rather go with Gibbs, Barkley, Spears. But if you have to fit a guy in that range, I would probably go Breece Hall.
Yeah, it sounds like Braylon Allen is going to be out. It sounds like Breece Hall, they're leaning towards going to be able to go. And Isaiah Davis also has a back injury that he's working through. But we could have a min-priced Seattle Seahawk here because Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker, neither are practicing right now. And so up in the air a little bit. I mean, Kenny McIntosh would be the popular lay at 4,000. George Holani is getting work too, and he might step in as a little bit more of that power back with McIntosh being a little bit more of a receiving back. So that's right now. We're recording on Wednesday, waiting to hear the news for the rest of the week. But yeah, there could be a minimum price Seahawk running back popping into lineup consideration. It's that wide receivers. Devin, what are you doing with your wide receivers this week?
Yeah, you guys are probably going to try and talk me into Drake London or some ridiculous play. And Kyle Pitts and Darnell Mooney and all these other guys. Brian Thomas, first name I'm clicking on. So 6,300. I think he's just not priced high enough. Clearly the number one rookie this year. The guy just continues to produce. If I look at his DraftKings points, he had 30 last week. He has at least 12 in each of his last 3 games. In a favorable matchup as well against Las Vegas. So I think he's interesting. Jeff called it last week. I think you have to go with Jalen Coker at 4,200. 24 DraftKings points last week. If you need savings, which we're going to talk about some high-end receivers likely, but I think Coker should be in a favorable matchup against Arizona this week. And at 4,200, you could certainly do worse. And because I'm paying down to Coker, the question is, who do I pay up for? And give me Jamar Chase, 8,500. I think you can fit both Chase and Barkley in a lineup pretty easily if you go down to Penix and you go down to Coker. He just provides a level that others just can't. Like 18.4, and it was a bad game last week. So going up against Martin Emerson for a lot of that game will be extremely favorable for Chase. And the Bengals still seem like they care. At least Joe Burrow is giving their coaching staff quite an earful, as if he cares. Where the Browns are just, this game could be 42-10.
If somebody was on Coker last week, I'm betting it was Phil, because I don't think I was really on him last week. But
maybe it was. Somebody mentioned Coker.
Yeah, I might have dropped a cokehead joke in there somewhere.
Phil, what are you looking at?
So for me, since I went with Connor and I have a little bit more cash than Devin, who went with Barkley, and assuming Spears or someone in that range opens up, the guy I'm paying up for at wide receiver is Puka Nacua, and we just saw that he was the only usable fantasy asset in an otherwise wasteland of a Thursday night game. that like ruined everybody's fantasy playoffs. He was still fine. So I think that proves his floor. The Rams are in the hunt. Go ahead.
Why Nakua over Chase for $500?
Because I can't find the $500, and there's a couple of other guys that I'm pushing to play.
So you're not on Coker?
Not on Coker and Cash. No, not at this point anyway.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
If
I just see
find $500, would you go Chase over Nakua?
Probably.
Okay.
I think the floor is the same, and Chase's ceiling is definitely higher. So
Okay.
I would say I'd rather Chase. But the Rams are in the hunt for the division title. The Jets are playing out the string. Their defense, especially, is a shell of what it was to start the season. So I like the Rams to put a big number on the Jets. And then I think that at 6,000, Jackson Smith and Jigba, especially if something goes down with those running backs, because they've kind of been using him as an extension of the running game anyway. That might be how they choose to move the ball. It's definitely the path of least resistance against the Minnesota defense. They've allowed more fantasy points to wide receivers than any team this season, including the fifth most over the last 5 weeks. And really just with the way that offensive line has been playing, they need to get it out quick when they pass the ball. And that really does favor Smith and Jigba. So I like him. 12 targets last week. That was actually his 5th game of the season with double-digit targets. So that feels pretty good in cash. And then I do agree on Brian Thomas at 6,300. He was the 3rd receiver in my lineup. The only question this week is they're playing the Raiders, and we'll see if as much passing volume is needed for Mac Jones as there has been the last couple of weeks. But I think if Aiden O'Connell plays, I think the Raiders could still push them just fine, and that might be a game that's way under the radar that could potentially have some numbers, because there is some good fantasy pieces on both sides. And then
the Raiders have allowed 270 passing yards or more in 4 of their last 5. So I know they shut down Kirk Cousins on Monday, but they haven't been good.
Yep. And then the rest, I would say, the one guy that I'm keeping an eye on from an injury standpoint is Malik Washington at 3,700. If Jalen Waddle doesn't make it back, his injury was bad enough to knock him out of the game before the first half ended last week. Took me out of my fantasy playoff matchup. Thanks a lot, Jalen Waddle. But if he's out and they've released Odell Beckham, Tua got Grant, how do you say it, DeBose. He put that guy in the hospital, throwing a ball over the middle. So Washington should be stepping into some volume. He had 6 targets and 52 yards in Waddle's stead last week. So we know that that's a pass-happy offense. I think that could be maybe a better way to go than Coker potentially if Waddle is out.
Can I give a PSA?
Yep.
The first thing that you guys should do, if you're using an optimizer or a lineup builder or whatever it is find Deebo Samuel's name and click that little X next to it. Because the optimizers still love this guy. And he's 5,200. And he doesn't score more than 4 fantasy points any single week. I just saved you more money than you could ever imagine. Just click the X, never worry about this guy again, and move on with your life. That's all.
Is the Lions secondary still functional, you think, or that beat up as the rest of the defense?
But
they didn't look it.
Kind of like Keenan Allen.
I mean, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, they're all kind of. There's a lot of there's the mid 5,000s kind of feels like a bug light right now, where it's like I shouldn't touch these guys, but they're sitting here. I don't know.
We saw Allen torch this defense up. The reason I like him more than Moore. Here we go again. More than Moore. is I do think the safeties are still good. Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch are still like the only guys left, right? So I think the underneath passing is there for Allen. We saw him tear them up with 24 fantasy points, 20 or more in 3 of his last 4, 5,300. I think he's definitely cash viable. More, I think, is more of a tournament play, but I won't be mad at you if you said you preferred more.
Imagine someone telling you in August that we're sitting here week 16 and Khalil Shakir is more expensive than Devonta Smith, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Debo Samuel. I mean, you would think that Khalil Shakir would be a $7,500 player, but that's kind of where we are. All right. Tight ends. What are we looking at tight ends? Phil, what are you looking at your tight ends?
Brenton Strange, 3,500, insanely targeted 12 times last week. And while I wouldn't expect that again, he's been viable on DraftKings pretty much in every game he stepped in for Evan Ingram this year. He's got 4 games with at least 9 DraftKings points, and I think we need to pay down this week. I kind of don't love being reliant on a pair of Jaguars, but I do think the volume is safe. That seems to be where it's all going. So those guys look fine. And I'm not arguing with anyone who wants to find a way to play Trey McBride. I mean, I don't see how to do it. I guess you could flex him, but another double-digit target game for him last week. That's his 4th straight. So nothing wrong with finding a way to get him into your cash game lineup.
Yeah, Strange is a second-round pick in 2023, so he's not a slouch. He's not some random guy that they just kind of fell off there. You'd expect him to be the tight end probably next year with Evan Ingram having a big balloon on his contract. Devin, are you going anywhere else at tight end, or are you kind of feeling the same thing?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the question that people are going to ask themselves and probably convince themselves of is whether to pay $500 for Kyle Pitts. Like, if you like Penix, who's he going to throw to? I'm not doing it because I really don't like Penix at all. But I'm playing him at quarterback because these 2 Goonies talked me into it. So I'm going to go. Do I want 2 Jaguars? That's the problem. It's a lot of Mac Jones.
It didn't feel great. Did not feel great.
No, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. Not even like great. Maybe I move off. My brain is fried. You know what? I'm going to find a way to get to Sam Laporta at 4,700. 10 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. No David Montgomery. Is Amon-Ra St. Brown really going to have that good of a game again? I think they're going to have to throw and throw and throw and throw and throw. I'll find a way to get to 4,700.
I like that too. All right. Make sure to, before we open up the board and look at our GPP plays, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Check out our shop while you're there. Look for some Christmas gifts. Look for a subscription to next year. Do all those things. And we appreciate your patronage and your support and you just being here all year. That means a lot to us. But GPP plays. Let's open up the board and look at quarterbacks here. Devin, what are you looking at for your quarterbacks for GPP plays?
This is where I'm playing Anthony Richardson, 5,400. I know he's going to be popular. I don't really care. Facing a Tennessee defense that they're probably on quit watch. They're going to Mason Rudolph, which should help this game actually be a little bit more high scoring, but he just has the upside that other quarterbacks in that range don't have. Caleb Williams, 5,500. I think same story. The Bears have to. It's gonna. There's a shootout game depending on the weather, but Sunday's looking pretty nice. Probably about 50 degrees here, so I'm completely okay with Caleb Williams. I think you can get to.
Did we lose Devin?
I think we did.
All right. So while
Let's try again. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I got cut off. Magic of editing. You guys won't even recognize it, but that's cool. Jaden Daniels. I think it's a Jaden Daniels week. I think he's a guy that could jump in and certainly be in a high-scoring shootout type game. I don't think that the Commanders are going to be able to run the ball at all this week, so I think he's a guy that certainly is going to be leaned upon kind of in a must-win for the Commanders. Last guy I'll mention, and we've been talking about him really the last several weeks, is Aaron Rodgers. Who knows where this guy's head is at, but he's playing good football right now. And if he even wants an opportunity, I'm going to continue to ride him throughout the remainder of the season because he's playing for a future contract.
Phil, are you feeling that Aaron Rodgers love as a Jets fan? And what direction are you going on GPP plays here?
I'll have some tournament exposure just because I like the game, and I'm astounded. I think that my theory from last week that he was playing through an injury and not being totally forthcoming with what it was might have been true earlier this season, because how on earth do you explain this guy running for 45 yards in that game last week? I mean, I know he's throwing the ball well, but we already knew he could do that. That was just bizarre. It's like watching a different person. So yeah, I'm on board with Rodgers, but my number one guy in tournaments, in the words of my favorite movie character, Big Ern McCracken from Kingpin, classic movie, Joe Burrow and the Bengals are riding a gravy train with biscuit wheels. Why get off that gravy train against this hapless Cleveland team? Burrow scored 20 DraftKings points last week, which qualified as disappointing. Before that, he had 25 plus in 5 straight games. Maybe the Browns show up for a division game in some way that they failed to last week against the Chiefs. But yeah, I don't think so either.
I mean,
Since he's favored by
Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson both looking unlikely to play this week in the secondary. They still have Denzel Ward, but he gets hurt almost every game. So, like, if Martin Emerson was the worst cornerback in football, how good is his backup?
Right. Yeah, I think all we need to know is that Cincinnati is favored by a touchdown. This game has the highest over-under on the slate, and the quarterback on the other side is Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So what does that say about the implication for Cincinnati scoring points? It means that they are probably going to score a lot.
You kind of almost need Thompson-Robinson to not suck, though. Like, you're kind of rooting for him to, like, okay, DTR, can you get me, like, 14 points? Because I need this game. I need them to keep throwing.
But they're one of those teams that kind of keeps their foot on the gas and runs it up and has fun, and everybody gets their numbers. So I'm not too worried. I think that the question that you asked about Josh Allen and whether or not he's going to have to throw the way that he did the last couple of weeks is definitely a valid one, especially considering he cost 8,700. I'm a little bit more willing to see if we could ride the hot hand, just because New England's defense is fairly awful. And I mean, if there's a quarterback in the league that's going to give us a shot at hitting 35 to 40 DraftKings points in 3 quarters, it is Josh Allen at this point. So it's not impossible. At 8,700, yes, that's a lot, but Shakir is the most expensive piece to pair him with at 5,900, which isn't terrible. If you want to run it back and say that it becomes a back and forth type of game environment, there's not a New England Patriot that I could think of, a pass catcher that costs more than like 4K. So, like, overall, rolling that game out there isn't crazy. You could still build a lineup out of it. So I'm okay with Josh Allen as long as you go in with the expectation that he's going to throw a lot less than he has the last couple of weeks.
I think the biggest thing for me is he going to run? Like, yeah, he might throw, but does he need to take hits? What's the point?
I think around the goal line, it's just what he does.
Yeah.
You know, so it might not matter all that much. Like, yeah, maybe the yardage won't be there, but we still can't rule out. I mean, even one rushing touchdown for a quarterback is such a boost. And then the only other guy I throw out there is Mason Rudolph. I think that Tennessee and Indianapolis has the makings of one of those sloppy shootouts where like the scoring could go completely nuts because there's defensive touchdowns and all sorts of things going on. And if the field is on the Anthony Richardson side, which it sounds like they're going to be, I think we could go the other way with Rudolph and a Titans pass catcher. I mean, he's probably got like a 25 DraftKings point ceiling. So you're hoping that the guys like Burrow and Allen don't put the slate completely out of reach if you play him. But I'm willing to go there.
If there's ever a week to
he's
play
done it.
Mason Rudolph, it's Christmas week.
Good point. Wasn't even thinking.
Even though he's a racist.
All right. Dorian Thompson-Robinson. 4,800. Talk about the Bengals. Bengals at this point are basically trying to impress the college football playoff committee to hopefully that let them into the 7th spot, because mathematically it's really difficult for them. Coming back the other way, I mean, I don't know that Dorian Thompson-Robinson can throw for 200 yards, but he definitely could run for 100 yards against this Bengals defense. So you start to rack it up a little bit, and especially if Joe Burrow's out there throwing for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, I mean, you get some garbage time. I don't know. I'm at 4,800. If the field is playing Michael Penix or players like that, that might be a pivot that allows you into some similar situations, but a different play on quarterback. That's all I really got for quarterback this week. I think you guys covered it. I think you did a good job there. Running backs. Devin, open it up. Running back, what are you looking for in your GPP place?
Again, just play Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't see a path where let me clarify.
Would you stack Gibbs and Jared Goff?
No, because I would want a wide receiver. I mean, you could, but I don't know that his pass catching upside might be somewhat limited. Because Montgomery isn't there, but probably not. I would probably, if I'm going to do that, I'm probably going to take Caleb Williams and Gibbs and hope that Detroit gets out to a big lead and then there's garbage time. So that's probably the stack I would go, and then you could go with a Keenan Allen and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that's probably a pretty good stack. But I think Gibbs is certainly the guy that most people will target. I currently projected to be over 30% rostered. I don't think that's high enough at 7,500. So he's certainly a top guy for me this week. Then it gets interesting because Chase Brown is going to be popular. I don't know that should happen at 7,700. 7,700 is a high price. The Browns, their secondary is awful, but their front 7 isn't too bad, especially if Myles Garrett somehow plays. So I don't know that I like Chase Brown all that much. But then looking down the list, it's a bunch of guys. I do like Breece Hall again. I'm going up against this Rams defense. I think that the Rams, I don't know how they're as good as they are records-wise, but they are. Jonathan Taylor, 6,900. If there's ever a revenge game type, not a revenge game, but a get-right game after he had one of the most bonehead plays in football, I think he's going to try and do everything he can to score a touchdown, and the team's going to try and do that as well. And if that game does shoot out, which certainly is a possibility, he's a guy that you could target. James Cook is going severely underlooked. Right now he's 2% rostered against New England, who has one of the worst run defenses in football. They've been better since Jabril Peppers has been back, but they still are just lacking a lot of talent on that defensive line and at the linebacker position this week. It's kind of it for me. I'm really off of Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard this week, who are going to be the 2 of the 3 highest players. If you are fading Michael Penix, you could look at Bijan Robinson and just think that this is going to be a run-heavy approach from Atlanta.
Phil, do you have other plays?
Well, I don't think so. I think Devin might have cleaned me clear out. We talked about Jerome Ford earlier at 5,600, and that this is where I would slot him in. Agreed with Devin that James Cook, with Buffalo favored by 2 touchdowns at home, makes a heck of a lot of sense. And he really shouldn't be going sub 5% owned. I mean, yes, he's expensive, and no, he doesn't have a bell cow workload, but we've seen him reach damn near 30 DraftKings points in about 23% of his games this season. Um, so if he's going to be like 2% owned, seems like a pretty clear GPP play to me. I also had Jonathan Taylor. I was also crafting the narrative that he's going to be angry Jonathan Taylor and he's going to want to score some touchdowns. Um, and that does create a little bit of value for us, by the way, on DraftKings, because if we had added that touchdown to his box score last week, his price probably goes up $300 or so from where it is now. So we're getting a pretty good price. The only name that I've got that Devin didn't mention, because I actually had Bijan Robinson as my cash game alternate if we don't get Tajay Spears. And I don't mind playing him alongside of Penix because he catches passes. I mean, the Giants have allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs over the last 5 weeks. We should expect Atlanta to want to lean on the run with a rookie quarterback out there. And the game script certainly implies a field day. You know, the only potential downfall is maybe a blowout and Tyler Algier taking a little bit more work as they take the air out of the ball in the second half. And how about Isaac Garendo at 6,700? So now he's priced up sort of in a similar way to how Chase Brown is now priced up. And with Garendo, though, he kind of dudded out in prime time last week. So I don't think he's going to go past maybe 5% owned. And Miami isn't a great matchup for running backs lately. They were earlier this season, but they're not anymore. But I think Garendo has shown enough involvement catching passes. We know he has big play upside, and I think he's going to go largely ignored and have that backfield to himself. So I wouldn't mind sneaking him in tournaments at, maybe 2 or 3 times the field's rate.
It just depends where he ends up because I'm seeing his roster percentage all over the board. I'm seeing 13% all the way down to 4%. So, like, if he's closer to the 4% range, I completely agree with you. If he's 13%, like, there's no way.
I don't know if he's going to play, to be honest. He picked up a hamstring injury against the Rams. He has not practiced, so he was out of practice today. So I don't know that they're counting on him this week. But that could open it up. Patrick Taylor at 5,200 could be in play there. I don't know what Patrick Taylor's.
No. I mean, they've also had a little bit of extra time to get some of those other guys a little bit more acclimated. As a Jets fan, I was always kind of intrigued by Izzy Abanikanda.
Izzy to the hizzy.
Yeah.
They could be a split backfield. Well, this team is Abanikanda some early down work and Taylor some passing down work. So
talk about quit watch. Like, this team is. Trent Williams is out for the year. Like, I don't know how they stay motivated, to be honest.
They're gonna trade Kyle Shanahan for a first round pick, don't you know, Devin?
Along with Debo.
Yes.
Debo is gonna eat himself out of the league. He's on my diet.
If Michael Penix is as bad as Devin suggests, Tyrone Tracy Jr. might be in play at 5,500. If that game is able to stay close, I think if that game's close, that they are willing to make Tracy a bell cow. It seemed like if the game's close, they'll lean on him. If not, then they'll just pull him out of there and let Singletary take some of that beating as well. Already mentioned the Seahawks.
It's not only going to be close. The Giants are going to win.
Mentioned the Seahawks monitoring that injury situation, monitoring the Isaac Garendo injury situation. I do like the Jerome Ford call out at 5,600. That I think for going up against that Bengals defense, I want to figure out a way to, I don't know. I'm terrified of the Browns offense with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at the helm, but the Bengals defense is that bad. All right, let's look at wide receivers here. And Phil, what are you looking at wide receivers for your GPPs?
Yeah, so we had AJ Brown pegged as the squeaky wheel last week. That was kind of obvious, and that proved right to the tune of 28 DraftKings points. And I like him to keep it rolling. Washington is actually allowing 24% fewer fantasy points than league average to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks, but I'm not so sure that I'd put stock in that because they've played against the Jake Hayner, Spencer Rattler poo poo platter, Will Levis, and Cooper Rush in their last 3 games. Um, in their 5th game, it was George Pickens and the Steelers, and Pickens had a pretty good game, 91 and a touchdown. And then the last game in that sample was actually against this Philly team, and they kept Brown in check, but Saquon Barkley really went nuts in that game. And it's rare that we see 2 division games kind of play out to the exact same script in the rematch. And I think Brown is just hungry for the spotlight at this point. I think he enjoyed, kind of putting that big game on the board after he was the public squeaky wheel. So I think that the Philly passing game on the whole could actually be good for tournaments. Um, Jamar Chase, just because he's got the highest ceiling of any receiver in the NFL. We already talked about him. And then another good call out from last week was actually mine. It was Malik Neighbors at 6,100. And yeah, he had 14 targets, found the end zone for the first time since week 3, scored 24 DraftKings points. And I think people still want very little to do with this Giants offense, even though it's another great passing matchup, just like it was last week against Baltimore. I mean, Neighbors is pretty much the entire offense at this point. He's how they attempt to move the chains. And while Desmond Ritter couldn't really do anything to Atlanta's pass defense last week because he's Desmond Ritter, we've seen like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Lad McConkey, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. In the last few weeks, they've really lit up this Atlanta team. So I think Neighbors could get over on them and see a repeat of his performance last week. And then I got one more, and this is a leverage play, strictly a leverage play. Parker Washington at 4,300 because Devin and I both landed on a pair of Jaguars in our cash game lineup. So that means Brian Thomas and Brenton. Oh, I'm sorry, you found a way to get to Sam Laporta. Fair enough, but it speaks to the fact that Strange and Thomas are both going to be very popular. Parker Washington doesn't leave the field. Even if he fails, he probably won't ruin your lineup. You know, he'll give you like a 2x on his $4,300 salary just by virtue of being out there. But we did see him go for 27 DraftKings points 3 weeks ago, so he has demonstrated a ceiling. If even if he'll only reach it like a very low percentage of the time, I think he's going to be like half of 1% owned, and I think he could hit that ceiling more often than that. And when he succeeds, he does it at the expense of Strange and Brian Thomas Jr., which jumps you past a good deal of your opponent. So, interested in Parker Washington.
Yeah, I don't have a lot. I mean, the only name I'll throw out there is Josh Downs, 4,900. The price just seems a little bit too cheap. If you like Anthony Richardson, I think Downs is a guy that you could certainly pair him with. He was great early on in the season. Has struggled with injuries and staying healthy, but played last week. Didn't look great, but I think the price is at least intriguing for a guy who had been the number one receiver with Anthony Richardson. And then one more name, Cooper Kupp, is a pivot off of Puka Nacua. 20 or more DraftKings points in 3 of his last 5. $6,500 is a little bit cheap. You're really getting that benefit of that 0-point game built into his price. So he's risky, but if Nacua does struggle, and Nacua is going to be one of the most popular players on this slate, so pivot off of him, save about $1,600 and go to Cooper Kupp.
Devontae Adams at 7,100. We saw the explosion last week. Yeah. I think that Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers are kind of it's like a little bit of maybe like the now I just went blank, but Thelma and Louise when they grab hands and drive the car off the cliff. I think that we might be there with Aaron Rodgers and Devontae
I think
Adams.
there's an F it mode.
Yes,
Like, we got
exactly.
nothing to lose. Let's just go have fun.
Yep. Let's go have fun. They'll give you 15 targets. You'll score 2 or 3 touchdowns, and we'll go have some fun here. I do like that coming back off the Rams. I think there are options there. Down at the bottom, Trey Tucker at 3,900 going up against Jacksonville. That was just shredded last week by Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it's been a couple weeks since he's done much of anything, and this is only if Aiden O'Connell is back in the lineup. But he could get loose for 1 or 2 and catch a long touchdown there. Tommy Brown at 3,400. He did have an injury. He had a play called back. He had a 24-yard reception called back late in the game against the Saints. He is the number 2 wide receiver for the Commanders. He played about 75% of the snaps. That was exactly where they were using Noah Brown. Diami Brown stepped right into there. Lower week last week, but capability of catching a touchdown, although that is a difficult matchup. It is priced in at 3,400. At some point, DK Metcalf, I feel like, has to do something at 5,500. And he's going up against a Minnesota defense that has given up points to wide receivers this year. And I do like the call out, Phil, that you made in cash games talking about Jackson Smith and Jigba at 6,000. If they do not have either of those top 2 backs, we know Minnesota can move the ball and score. So I do kind of like that DK Metcalf punt in a tournament if you want to go that direction. Tight ends. Do we have anything else off tight ends? Phil, do you see anything off the tight end board?
Yeah, so I mentioned Malik Washington earlier if Jalen Waddle sits out, but the more obvious path would just be more targets for Jonnu Smith at 5,500, who at this point is just one of the best and most consistent tight ends in all of fantasy football. He had 11 targets last week with Waddle missing half the game. That was his third 11-target game in his last 4 outings. He's reached exactly 11 targets in 3 out of 4. He's basically everything that we hoped Kyle Pitts would be for the last 3 years. Shout out to Arthur Smith for getting there before we did. And then TJ Hawkinson at 4,800. The Minnesota offense keeps humming along, and it's definitely easier to attack Seattle in the passing game with tight ends than it is for wide receivers. So I think this is a spot where Hawkinson could get up to 8 or 9 targets, and I like his chances of finding the end zone.
The only other name I'll throw out there is Jordan Akins, 3,200. It doesn't look like David Njoku is going to go. In Dorian Thompson-Robinson's 3 starts, 42% of his yards went to tight ends. So David Njoku had, I think, 50 yards in each of those 3 games. So he can't throw the ball, but he's targeting the tight end position.
Chigakonkwo, 3,400. He caught that big touchdown against the Texans, 70-yard touchdown. And it's almost like that kind of, they made them realize that they still have Chigakonkwo on their team because they've really used him a lot more in the couple weeks after that. Last week, coming off a career high, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 3,400 down on the board, even cheaper than Brenton Strange. I mean, he's certainly, we know the athleticism is there for a big play. I mean, Phil talking about playing Mason Rudolph potentially. If things break out there. I mean, he could be a quiet under the radar play. Stacks. Favorite stacks of the week. Phil, what's your favorite stack?
So I like what Devin was talking about earlier, Caleb Williams with Jahmyr Gibbs on the way back. And then I think that you could double stack Williams any way that you want with Moore, Allen, or even Odunze. Outside of that, I'll give you a couple more. If Aiden O'Connell plays,
you took 9, and then you're going to just name a couple more. Thanks.
Correct. I'll see if I could take your second one also. I like Aiden O'Connell with Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, run it back with Brian Thomas. So take the other side of the game that is going to be chalky on the Jaguar side. And then, I don't know, I'm going to play at least one Michael Penix lineup, and it'll probably look something like Penix, maybe with Bijan, with Drake London, and then maybe Neighbors as the run back.
We got to figure out a way we got to score this next year. We got to do it'd be fun to figure out a way that we could do that. But Devin, what do you got?
Well, I was going to say Caleb Williams, but someone had to name every game on this slate. I'm going to go Aaron Rodgers mode and just say F it. Anthony Richardson, Josh Downs, Calvin Ridley.
I'm going to go Aaron Rodgers mode and say F it and say Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams back to back. Let's go. You've got Rams options you can run against that Jets defense that's giving up. I hit it last week saying, Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and Brian Thomas Jr. I really do like the Puka Nacua side of that for the Rams. I think that he is an elite ascending receiver. So, yeah, let's go back. There's no reason not to.
You're welcome.
Phil. Thank you. Discount play of the week, Phil. What's your discount play of the week?
It is one Washington or another. Malik Washington at 3,700 if Jalen Waddle sits. If we don't get Malik Washington in the starting lineup, then Parker Washington, who I mentioned, as leverage on the chalky Jaguars at 4,300 would be my pick.
Going point chasing, Jalen Coker. Don't feel good about it, but
if you guys are really just going to leave it out there for me, I'm taking Michael Penix at 4,500 as the discount play of the week. I mean, I think he's going to be good. I'm excited for it. I think that it's been needed the last couple of weeks, and let's see what he does here. But Devin, it's almost Christmas time, and what do you have to say to the people?
Merry Christmas.